The lantern trembled in the overseer's hand, casting long, trembling shadows across the ledger's yellowed pages. He knew the numbers, the accounts of sugar, the tally of enslaved bodies like property, but these entries were different. Pulse quickened. Something alive, something unnatural had been recorded here. Blue eyes, blonde hair, children appearing in the quarters who should not exist. Each child a silent scream, a testament to the power wielded without conscience. Without law, without witnesses who could dare speak, the whispers had grown across parishes' stories, carried on the river currents, in the darkened cabins, whispered. Behind closed doors, stories of impossibility that chilled even the hardest hearts. Babies born to mothers of deep brown skin. Fathers of African descent, yet the children emerged pale, eyes piercingly blue, hair like sunlight. The overseer's name was Vincent Hebert, meticulous, methodical, a man who believed control was truth. But control could not account for this. 7 years of careful documentation had revealed the pattern, and now he could not deny what he had seen. Yet, no one spoke openly. Plantation owners, the masters, the overseers, they all danced around this secret, nodding to the law, to propriety, to inheritance. While beneath the polished floors of grand houses and beneath the sprawling sugar fields, a silent corruption persisted, deliberate and invisible. The ledger itself became a weapon, a mirror showing the impossibility made flesh. Each entry was a mark of transgression, a calculated exposure of human power wielded with complete impunity. Hibert's mind raced with unspoken questions. Who? How? Why? The answers could destroy lives, destroy reputations, upend everything the plantations claimed to uphold. And yet, he had begun to notice a pattern. The mothers all worked near the main house. The births coincided with periods when the enslaved were under the master's direct gaze. Coincidence? Possible? Someone was orchestrating this. Someone unseen. Someone with authority and means. Someone who understood fear and obedience. Someone who could move through the system unseen. Tonight the candle guttered, casting the child's strange reflection in Hibert's eyes, and he understood for the first time the true horror of what had begun. This was not random. No, this was design. And those who held the power to command could use it in ways that no law, no prayer, no moral argument could ever undo. Before we descend further, remember, what you are about to witness is forbidden knowledge. The truths we uncover will make you question lineage, history, and the very definition of control. Once heard, this cannot be unheard. Welcome to the hidden parishes of Louisiana. Welcome to a darkness cultivated by design. The dawn was reluctant that March morning in 1837, as if even the sun hesitated to illuminate what was happening on Belmont Plantation. Josephine, the midwife who had seen more births than most could count, approached the small cabin with hands that had delivered life and death alike. She carried the weight of decades, her mind honed to the rhythm of labor, yet even she felt a chill crawling up her spine. Inside, Marie lay pale, exhausted from the night's contractions. Her dark eyes were hollow, her body trembling with a fatigue, born not only of work but of inevitability, the knowledge that on this plantation, a woman's life was never entirely her own. The baby emerged, screaming in the dim lamplight, and Josephine's practiced hands paused. She lifted the infant, and for a heartbeat, time seemed to stop. Pale skin, hair as bright as winter sunlight, eyes that glinted like frozen water. This was impossible. Every law of heredity, every experience, every pattern Josephine had observed in her long life screamed against it. And yet, the child existed. She wrapped the baby tightly in cloth, but the tremor in her hands betrayed her fear. This was not merely a birth. This was a signal, a fissure in the order of control, a crack in the facade of the plantation world. Marie, staring down at her daughter, felt a terror she could not name. She had known suffering, seen death rip through her people, experienced the grinding cruelty of the sugar fields. Yet this was different, was beyond comprehension. a violation not only of expectation, but of reason itself. Her mind grasped for answers that did not exist. And when she spoke, her voice was barely a whisper. "She is mine." "But she is not mine," she said, an acknowledgement of the paradox that no one could unravel. Her words hung in the room like smoke, tangible, heavy, inescapable. Outside, the world carried on. The fields waited, the mills ground, the overseers calculated productivity, unaware or unwilling to face the impossible truth growing in the quarters. But Josephine knew. Marie knew. And the baby, though too small to understand, carried in her fragile body the mark of a secret that would ripple through every corner of Louisiana's parishes. This was not just a child. This was evidence. Evidence that someone, somewhere, wielded power over life itself in ways that no one dared speak aloud. Hibbert would later document every detail in his secret journal times. Names, appearances, patterns. But tonight, in the quiet, the trembling cabin, only the midwife and the mother felt the weight of reality. The ledger had recorded an anomaly. The world had yet to recognize it. Yet already the whispers began, soft as silk but sharp as knives. Spreading across the riverbanks, the cabins, the hidden corridors of power, the first crack had formed in the system, and there would be no turning back. Vincent Hibbert sat alone. In his small overseer's house, the candlelight flickering across the pages of his personal journal. Each entry he wrote felt heavier than the last, as if the weight of what he was documenting pressed against his chest, restricting his breath. He had seen many things in his years on Louisiana plantations, the exhaustion, the accidents, the cruelty, but nothing had prepared him for this. Blue eyes, blonde hair, children born to enslaved women, whose very existence contradicted everything he understood about heredity, ancestry, and control. 7 years of ledger entries now formed a pattern, and patterns were never accidental. He read the first few entries again, tracing the dates, the names, the plantations: Bellamont, Riverside, Oakmont, St. Clair, Magnolia Grove, each a geographic waypoint on a river of quiet terror. Each mother had worked near the main houses. Each child bore the impossible marks of ancestry that should not exist. Hibbert's mind tried to rationalize it. European lineage carried through distant bloodlines. Perhaps, but the timing, the repetition, the concentration of births, it was no coincidence. Someone was orchestrating this, moving unseen, manipulating the very laws of life with impunity. He thought of Marie, of her pale child, of the look in her eyes. When she held the infant for the first time, he thought of Josephine, old and wise, her face pale but steady, yet trembling under the weight of recognition. Hibbert knew he should report it. He should alert the Duchamp family, the neighboring planters, the authorities. But he did not. The knowledge was dangerous. The truth, if acknowledged, could destroy careers, reputations, even lives. To speak was to risk being consumed by the very power that had orchestrated these births. And yet, the pattern could not be ignored. Word traveled swiftly along the river, carried by traders, house servants, midwives, even the enslaved themselves. By the end of the week, every neighboring plantation knew. People whispered of curses, of divine punishment, of spirits that moved unseen. Some feared the unknown. Some recognized the deliberate cruelty and power behind these occurrences. For Hibbert, it was something else entirely, an awakening. He was witnessing the raw mechanics of control, the way those in power could manipulate bodies, families, and the very laws of nature to cement dominion over life itself. He began to question everything he had believed about the plantation system. It was not merely a hierarchy of masters and enslaved, but a web of secrets, a lattice of unseen hands shaping reality. Each birth of these impossible children was a demonstration of authority, a calculated act that reminded everyone masters and servants alike that control extended into the most intimate corners of existence. Hibbert understood, with a clarity that terrified him, that the ledger he kept was no longer a simple record. It had become a map, a guide to the hidden forces that moved with precision, invisibility, and ruthless intention. And as he closed the journal that night, staring into the darkened river beyond the oak-lined banks, Hebert realized the descent had begun. The plantations were no longer merely land and labor. They were laboratories of power. He was now a witness to the first threads of a truth that would consume years, shape destinies, and reveal the darkest capacities of human design. The river. Fog clung to Riverside Plantation like a shroud, muffling the sound of horses' hooves and the distant grinding of sugar mills. Inside the quarters, Delaney's breathing was shallow, each contraction a reminder of her fragility, of how small. Her existence was in the grand machinery of the plantation. She had spent years moving silently through the main house, cleaning, preparing rooms, observing the world of masters she would never join. The labor of life and survival had honed her instincts, yet none of it prepared her for the child she was about to bear. The midwife Ruth, an older woman with eyes sharp as broken glass, guided Deline through the night. Each movement, each word, carried authority born from decades of witnessing both life and cruelty. When the baby finally emerged, the room seemed to hold its breath. Delina's arms trembled as she reached for her child. Pale skin, hair, the color of sunlight filtered through mist, eyes blue as the river at winter's edge, an impossible reflection in the candlelight. Ruth's face paled. Her hands froze, momentarily unwilling to touch what defied every law she had lived by. Melanie's whispers filled the cabin. "It cannot be. I have been with no one but Samuel." The words carried the weight of truth and terror. Samuel, a field hand assigned to her quarters, had been her partner in the eyes of the plantation. Yet here lay a child that could not possibly be his or anyone else's, she knew. The impossibility was palpable, pressing against the thin wooden walls, a force no one dared name. Even the air seemed heavier, charged with the knowledge of what had been wrought unseen. When Samuel arrived from the fields, exhaustion etched across his broad frame. The confrontation was immediate. His eyes widened as they fell on the baby, a disbelief mingled with anger hardening his expression. "This isn't my child," he said flatly, voice low but sharp, slicing through the tension like a blade. Deline held the child closer, trembling. "It is mine, and yet it is not. I have been with no one else," she said, the room trembling under the weight of unspoken truths. By midday, whispers had spread through Riverside as they had at Bellamont. Some feared curses, spirits, divine retribution. Others recognized an unseen hand orchestrating something deliberate, precise, and unstoppable. Yet no one could identify it. Vincent Hebert, reading his personal ledger across the river, noted the pattern with a cold clarity. Births always occurred near main houses, always to women of dark lineage, always producing children with pale skin and strikingly European features. The system itself was being manipulated. Each impossible birth, a thread weaving a hidden tapestry of power and control that no law could touch, no moral code could confront. Riverside was no longer a plantation. It had become a theater of forbidden experiments, silent stage upon which power demonstrated its reach into the most intimate and uncontrollable aspects of life. And in the quiet corners, Hibbert understood. The terrible truth, these were not isolated incidents. This was design. One somewhere was orchestrating life itself. The quarters were heavy with silence, punctuated only by whispers that traveled like shadows along the walls. Marie held Claire close, her fingers trembling as the child's blonde hair glimmered unnaturally in the morning light. Across the river, Delaney cradled her son Jing, feeling the weight of impossibility pressing on her chest. In the confined cabins, the enslaved women exchanged furtive glances, their understanding unspoken but visceral. Something was happening, something deliberate, and yet none dared voice it aloud. Fear had become both shield and chain. Vincent Hibbert walked the riverbanks, ledger in hand, the weight of observation pressing down on him like the humid Louisiana air. He cataloged every detail: dates, locations, maternal histories, labor patterns. Each entry confirmed the horrifying truth. This was not random. The births were clustered, concentrated around moments when women were drawn close to the main houses. In the features of the children, the pale skin, the unnatural hair, the piercing eyes were consistent. This was design. And design meant intention. Someone was exercising power at a scale Hibbert had never imagined, manipulating the laws of life and lineage with impunity. The enslaved people began to notice more than the physical anomalies. A shadow of unease stretched across every interaction with the masters. Workers who had once been compliant now moved through the quarters with subtle caution, recognizing the invisible hand that orchestrated events beyond their understanding. Mothers whispered warnings in the night, their words cloaked in metaphor. In prayer, "Do not let them see," they murmured. "Do not let them touch the rhythm of our lives." The children, too young to grasp their significance, carried the silent proof of a system that could reach inside the very essence of human existence and bend it toward a purpose none could name. Marie's face hardened with a realization that terrified her. Claire was not just a child. She was a message. It's every glance, every whisper, every moment in which someone powerful remained unseen, yet omnipresent, was a reminder that control was absolute. The overseers enforced rules with strict efficiency, yet they were blind to the origin of this anomaly, powerless to halt the deliberate orchestration. And yet the mothers knew. The knowledge was dangerous, a secret heavier than any bundle of sugar, any ledger entry. Knowledge in these quarters could kill, could ruin, could make one disappear quietly, erased from the plantation, as if never existing. Hibbert, despite his meticulous mind, began to feel the first creeping fingers of dread that would haunt him for years. The ledger was not a ledger anymore. It was a map of corruption, a record of forbidden control. And as he closed it that night, the candle guttering, he understood that this pattern would continue spreading, consuming, manipulating the lives of those bound to the plantations. The enslaved understood it too, in their whispered prayers and fearful gazes. Someone was orchestrating these impossible births, and no one, not even the law, could intervene. The shadows of power were long, and they reached into the very blood of Louisiana's children. Vincent Hibbert sat at his desk, candlelight flickering across the pages of his personal ledger, each word a weight pressing down on his chest. He had begun to catalog every birth, every anomaly, every detail that could provide a clue. Dates, names, plantations, maternal assignments, all laid bare in meticulous handwriting. But this was more than a ledger. It had become a weapon, a mirror reflecting the unspoken power orchestrating life itself. Every line he wrote pulled him deeper into a darkness that he could neither name nor escape. He traced the pattern: Bellamont, Riverside, Oakmont, St. Clair, Magnolia Grove. Each plantation a node in a network he could not fully map, yet the connections were undeniable. The mothers were always drawn close to the main houses, their labor, their proximity, their very existence manipulated with precision. And the children always impossible blue eyes, pale skin, hair like sunlight. It was deliberate. Someone had planned this. Someone with authority, access, and a vision of control so absolute it was terrifying. Hibbert knew he should report it, alert the Duchamp's browsers and other planters, but he did not. To speak was to risk being consumed by forces beyond his understanding. This was knowledge that could ruin him, or worse. The ledger became his confessional, his map, his silent weapon. Each entry was a coded scream, an acknowledgement that life and blood could be orchestrated, bent, controlled by invisible hands, and the truth once glimpsed could never be unseen. Meanwhile, across the plantations, whispers carried faster than the river itself. The enslaved noticed the pattern, even if they did not fully understand it. Mothers exchanged fearful glances, midwives murmured warnings under their breath, and even the youngest children seemed to carry the silent mark of impossibility. Each birth confirmed it. Control reached beyond the visible, beyond law and morality, into the very essence of human life. Fear became a currency, obedience a necessity, and knowledge a dangerous weapon. The ledger had begun to haunt Hebert. Each night he returned to its pages, compelled to write, to connect, to understand. He documented not only the physical anomalies, but the circumstances. The mother's proximity to the masters, the timing of pregnancies, the patterns of work and labor. And with each entry, the realization became undeniable. These were not random accidents of genetics or inheritance. These were deliberate acts of manipulation, orchestrated with precision and secrecy, designed to demonstrate that power could extend into the bloodline, into the very marrow of life. As Hebert closed the ledger, he felt the weight of the unseen eyes upon him. He was no longer a mere overseer, a recorder of cotton and sugar yields. He had become a witness to something far more dangerous, a system that could bend humanity itself, that could manipulate life with impunity, and that would not be challenged. The pattern would continue, he knew. And with that knowledge came a terror unlike any he had ever faced. Understanding the depth of corruption meant being forever changed by it. The morning mist clung to Oakmont like a veil, softening the edges of the sugar fields, yet doing nothing to hide the tension simmering within the quarters. Isabel moved quietly through the cabin, her hands steady with years of labor, but her mind weighed down by a growing unease. She had felt the whispers before, the faint tremors of something larger, something beyond comprehension. And now, as her labor began, a quiet dread settled in her chest, a premonition that this birth would not be ordinary. Ruth, the midwife, called. Once more, guided Isabel with practiced hands, her eyes scanning every detail, every anomaly. Hours passed, shadows shifting across the cabin walls, until at last the child arrived. A fragile gasp pierced the dim room. Isabel's eyes widened as she took in the impossible sight. Pale skin, hair, the color of wheat in sunlight. Eyes so startlingly blue, they seemed to cut through the dim lamplight. She shook, clutching the infant to her chest, her body trembling. With fear and disbelief, this was not a child of Gabriel, her partner, nor anyone she had known. And yet the evidence of life lay trembling in her arms. Word spread quickly through the quarters, faster than the riverboats could carry letters or news. Mothers exchanged hurried glances, their whispered warnings carrying weight far beyond the cabin walls. Every glance, every question, every act of observation was now infused with fear. The realization had settled like a cold fog. Someone, somewhere, wielded power over life itself, and no one dared challenge it. The children were not just anomalies. They were deliberate, impossible creations. Proof that control extended into the deepest and most intimate corners of existence. Hebert, across the river at Bellamont, documented the birth with an obsession that bordered on mania. Each entry reinforced the terrifying pattern: Bellamont, Riverside, Oakmont. The mothers, the proximity to main houses, the timing, all too precise to be chance. He felt a chill as he wrote. The ledger was no longer merely a record. It was an indictment of unseen forces, a map of intentional manipulation. And the enslaved, though they could not name it, felt the pressure of this unseen hand pressing down on their lives. Isabel held her daughter, a fragile bundle that seemed to carry the weight of an entire system of oppression and design. The quarters were silent as the other mothers looked on, eyes wide with recognition, hearts heavy with fear. They knew the pattern was real. They knew someone had orchestrated these impossibilities. They understood without words that their lives, their labor, and even their children were not wholly their own. Oakmont had become another node in a network of fear and control, its walls bearing witness to the impossible and the unspoken. Isabel's child, pale and blue-eyed, was not merely a baby. She was evidence. Evidence that the plantation's power reached into the very marrow of life. That obedience and silence were the only defenses against a force that moved unseen, precise, and ruthless. Hebert's pen traced the lines, capturing the horror for posterity. But no words could fully convey the dread, the manipulation, and the cold. Deliberate orchestration that had begun to consume the river parishes of Louisiana. March arrived. At St. Clair, with a chill that seeped into the bones, wrapping the plantation in a quiet unease, just 19 moved through the main house with a practiced silence, serving and cleaning while keeping her head down. She had been brought from the quarters to assist in preparation for a dinner party, a small privilege that carried the invisible weight of constant scrutiny. Her body was disciplined, her mind trained to obey, but in the quiet moments before dawn, she felt something stir, a dread she could not shake. The labor began unexpectedly, leaving her alone in the dim corner of the cabin. The midwife, an aging woman named Clemence, arrived with a measured calm, her eyes reflecting the history of countless impossible births she had witnessed in whispers. Hours passed, shadows stretching across the wooden walls, until at last, the child emerged, a boy, pale as moonlight, hair golden, eyes piercing and blue. Turs stared frozen as the impossible reality unfolded in her arms. She had been with no one but Antoine, her partner, yet here lay a child that defied every law of inheritance, every expectation of biology. Word of the birth spread quickly through the quarters, carrying fear and disbelief along the narrow paths and riverbanks. Mothers exchanged glances, midwives whispered warnings, and children stared with wide eyes at a world that seemed suddenly stranger and more dangerous than before. The pattern was undeniable. These births were not accidents. They were deliberate, precise, impossible, and the power behind them was unseen, absolute, and unchallengeable. Vincent Hebert's ledger grew heavier with each entry. Bellamont, Riverside, Oakmont, and now St. Clair. He traced the names, dates, and circumstances with an almost obsessive precision, noting that each mother had been near the main house at some point during conception. The children's features were identical in their impossibility. Pale skin, hair like sunlight, eyes like winter ice. Hibbert understood, with a chilling clarity, that the plantations were not simply sites of labor and oppression. They had become theaters of control, experimentation, and manipulation. And the enslaved, though powerless to confront it, were beginning to feel the weight of it, sensing that life itself could be wielded as a weapon against them. Turs clutched her child tightly, feeling both awe and terror. She was part of a growing pattern she could neither name nor resist. Across the river, Isabel and Delina had felt the same cold dread. Marie still held Claire close with the grim understanding that this was only the beginning. The quarters had become a landscape of fear and whispered truths, where obedience was. Survival and knowledge was dangerous. In the silence of the night, Hibbert closed his ledger and lit a candle, staring into the flame. He understood that the pattern would continue, that these births were not random, and that the forces behind them were beyond the comprehension of anyone who lived under the sun of Louisiana's plantations. He also realized, with a quiet terror, that this knowledge would mark him forever. To see the invisible hand at work was to step across a threshold, one from which there could be no return. September dawned at Magnolia Grove with a suffocating heat that pressed against every surface, making the sugar fields shimmer with exhaustion and sweat. Pauline moved silently through the laundry quarters, her hands raw from scrubbing endless garments, her back aching, her spirit heavy with the weight of endless labor. She had been called to the main house, as she had so many times before, to assist with cleaning, arranging, and serving. But this time, there was something in the air, an unease that pressed down on her chest like a physical weight, an instinctive warning that life was about to twist in ways no one could explain. The midwife arrived, a woman hardened by decades of witnessing births, yet even she carried a tension that betrayed the impossible knowledge she had absorbed over the years. Hours passed, the oppressive Louisiana sun creeping through narrow windows, until finally the infant emerged. Pauline's hands trembled as she lifted her daughter, a fragile bundle of impossibility, pale skin that glowed against the dim cabin light, hair like spun gold, eyes a piercing blue that seemed to look straight into the soul. The child could not have been hers nor anyone else she knew. And yet, here she was, evidence of something deliberate, something unnatural, and horrifyingly precise. The news spread through Magnolia Grove like wildfire, whispered from cabin to cabin, carried by midwives and children alike. Fear gripped the enslaved in a new way. Mothers clutched their own children tighter, sensing that life itself could be manipulated, twisted, and stolen by unseen forces. They began to speak in hushed tones about the pattern, connecting dots that the overseers ignored. They understood, even without knowing the full truth, that the world had shifted, that some invisible power had taken a hand in the very essence of their existence. Vincent Hebert's ledger now contained 5 impossible entries, each more damning than the last: Belmont, Riverside, Oakmont, St. Clair, Magnolia Grove. He traced the names, dates, and maternal proximity to main houses with obsessive detail. The pattern was now undeniable. This was deliberate, and the implication was horrifying. Life itself was being used as a tool of control, a demonstration of absolute power, a silent and intimate weapon. Hibbert knew the truth could not be spoken aloud. To reveal it was to risk destruction, yet to remain silent was to bear witness to a calculated and systemic corruption that few could comprehend. Pauline held her daughter close, trembling. The quarters, once a place of relative routine, had become a theater of terror. Each birth now carried a psychological weight far beyond the immediate mothers. It was a statement, a signal, a reminder of unseen authority that could reach into the deepest, most personal aspects of life. And across the river, Hibbert recorded it all. Knowing that this ledger had become something more than a record, it was a testament to a hidden power, a forbidden knowledge that would change the way anyone who saw it understood the very fabric of control, fear, and human manipulation. Night fell across the river parishes, heavy and suffocating, as Vincent Hibbert returned to his small room at Belmont. The candle's flicker cast long, trembling shadows over his ledger, illuminating names, dates, and the impossible births he had cataloged. Each entry was a nail in a coffin of understanding, a pattern that stretched across plantations like a dark web woven by unseen hands. Belmont, Riverside, Oakmont, St. Clair, Magnolia Grove, 5 children. 5 impossible miracles, or perhaps curses. He could not tell which. Hibbert traced the lines of his meticulous notes, his mind unraveling at the edges. The proximity of mothers to main houses, the timing of pregnancies, the impossibility of features, it was all connected. The children were not random. They were deliberate. And with each connection he uncovered, the depth of the manipulation became more terrifying. Someone was orchestrating life itself. Someone with power, access, and precision beyond comprehension. He began to feel the invisible eyes of that figure upon him, unseen, yet all-seeing, aware that the ledger had begun to map their design. Across the quarters, the enslaved whispered in shadows, their voices trembling with the recognition of a reality they had always feared, but never named. Mothers clutched their children and midwives exchanged knowing glances, realizing that these births were not accidents or quirks of genetics, they were deliberate acts. Power had extended itself into the very marrow of their lives, bending existence to the will of an unknown authority. Fear became not just a tool, but an undeniable truth. Embedded in every heartbeat, every glance, every breath, Hibbert could not ignore the broader implications. If this pattern continued, if more children were born impossible and unexplainable, the plantations themselves would become theaters of terror and obedience, the enslaved trapped in a reality, controlled by forces they could neither see nor resist. And yet, the ledger also offered him a strange clarity, a glimpse into the mechanics of manipulation. A map of hidden agendas, a silent testament to human cruelty, intertwined with absolute power. Hibbert felt the pull of something larger than any single plantation, larger than any single master or overseer. There was a design here, deliberate, precise, systematic. Each birth was a calculated proof of authority, a psychological tool wielded invisibly, testing obedience, fear, and trust. He realized with a cold certainty that someone, somewhere, was playing a game with lives as pieces, shaping the course of generations, and that knowledge of this game carried its own dangerous weight. To witness it was to be marked, to understand it was to be forever changed. The ledger sat open, each line a pulse of forbidden truth. Herbert's hand hovered over the page, trembling. The pattern was undeniable, the manipulation absolute. Across the river, in the shadows of other plantations, the figure behind it all continued unseen, orchestrating with precision, indifferent to law, morality, or humanity. The game had only just begun, and the players, the mothers, the children, the overseers were powerless pawns in a system designed to bend life itself. 2 years had passed since the first impossible birth at Belmont, yet the pattern had not faltered. It had grown sharper, more deliberate. Vincent Herbert, whose obsession with his ledger had become a consuming force, began to notice the rhythm of the events, as though he were reading the pulse of a hidden machine. He could no longer view each birth as isolated. Each child was a deliberate act, a calculated disruption, a demonstration of unseen authority. The sixth child appeared on a plantation called Willow Bend, a small property just upriver from Magnolia Grove. The mother, Rain, had been assigned to the main house for extra cleaning during the peak of the harvest. Her hands were rough from labor, her back stiff, her eyes wary, but she had grown accustomed to surviving in silence. When the infant emerged, the impossible reality revealed itself again. Pale skin, hair like sun-bleached straw, and eyes as blue and clear as frozen ice. Lorraine trembled, unable to comprehend the forces at work. The pattern was undeniable. This was no coincidence, no quirk of heredity. It was orchestration. Word spread quickly, whispered from cabin to cabin, carried along the river by traders and servants alike. Fear had metastasized into a tangible presence within the quarters. Mothers held their children close, praying silently that they would not be drawn into the unseen experiment unfolding before their eyes. The older children watched, innocent yet perceptive, sensing the tension that hung over every household. Every sugar mill, every shadowed corner of the plantations, something invisible, unstoppable, and ruthless was moving through their lives, shaping existence itself. Just months later, the seventh child arrived at Cypress Hollow, another plantation further upriver. The mother, young and quiet, had been serving in the main house and attending the family's needs under strict supervision. When her child was born, the same impossibility revealed itself. Golden hair, icy blue eyes, skin pale enough to glow in the candlelight. Panic rippled through the quarters. Whispered questions became murmurs of defiance. For the first time, the enslaved began to suspect that obedience alone could not protect them, that the system they had endured for generations was being manipulated from unseen hands in ways that defied comprehension. Herbert's ledger had grown fat with evidence. Belmont, Riverside, Oakmont, St. Clair, Magnolia Grove, Willow Bend, Cypress Hollow. 7 impossible births, each tied to proximity with the main houses, each identical in their impossibility. And with each entry, Hibbert felt the creeping realization that this pattern was far more than a series of anomalies. It was a deliberate demonstration of power, a psychological weapon, and an instrument of control that reached beyond any law or moral code. The enslaved began to whisper in the night, murmuring the names of the children in quiet solidarity, in defiance, masked as ritual. Claire Jing, Isabel Turs, Pauline Lorraine, the last one unnamed. These names carried weight, carrying the knowledge that life itself was being bent into service of a cruel and unseen hand. And somewhere in the shadows, the orchestrator watched, patient, precise, unchallenged, and unstoppable. As autumn settled over the river parishes, a strange stillness took hold across the plantations. The air felt heavier, as if the unseen hand guiding these impossible births had pressed itself into every corner of the quarters. Vincent Herbert spent long nights hunched over his ledger, candlelight flickering across meticulous entries that now felt like confessions. 7 children, each impossible, each connected by a web of unseen authority. He knew the pattern was deliberate, yet every attempt to trace its origin led to nothing but shadows. The orchestrator remained invisible, omnipotent, and terrifying. Across the plantations, the enslaved began to notice patterns in ways Hibbert never recorded. Mothers whispered about timing, about the rare moments they were allowed near the main houses, about the midwives and servants who moved silently through rooms no one else was permitted to enter. Fear mixed with the first sparks of recognition. This was not random. This was manipulation. Life itself had become a tool. A weapon wielded by someone who understood that control could extend into the most intimate spaces of existence. Conversations that once revolved around survival now carried the weight of forbidden observation. Hibbert's obsession intensified. It traced every child's conception, their mother's schedules, the nights spent in proximity to the masters. He cross-referenced each entry with harvest cycles, visitors to the main houses, and even the positioning of riverboats along the parishes. Connection only deepened the horror. Someone, somewhere, had orchestrated these impossibilities with precision. It was no longer simply a pattern. It was an assertion of absolute control over life, over inheritance, over human destiny. The enslaved, while powerless to directly confront it, began subtle acts of defiance. Secret glances, murmured warnings, protective gestures over their children. Each whispered phrase, each shared observation, became a network of understanding, a silent resistance to the invisible tyranny that sought to dominate their bloodlines. And yet the fear never fully left them. The knowledge of what could be done, of what had been done, hovered like a shadow that could strike at any moment. Hibbert felt the weight of the orchestrator's presence more acutely each night. The ledger had become a trap, binding him to the truth he could not unsee, a record of horror that demanded acknowledgement. The orchestrator, patient and calculating, allowed the entries to accumulate, perhaps to test Hibbert's comprehension, or perhaps to draw him deeper into a world of unseen power where morality, law, and human decency were irrelevant. The candle burned low as Hibbert stared at the ledger. Every child, every birth, every anomaly pointed toward the same inescapable conclusion. This was a deliberate demonstration of supremacy, an assertion that life itself could be wielded as a weapon against those too powerless to resist. And in that realization, Hibbert understood a truth that no one else dared consider. Once you saw the orchestration, you could never go back. You were changed forever. By the time the 8th child appeared, the pattern had become undeniable, a force. As tangible as the river that carved its way through the plantations, Hibbert's ledger now overflowed with evidence, each entry a pulse in a rhythm of terror that extended beyond the bounds of Belmont. Mothers clutched their children, midwives whispered in dread, and the enslaved moved through their daily lives with an unspoken awareness. Life itself was being orchestrated, shaped, and manipulated by an invisible hand, one that no law could touch, no rebellion could fully resist. The time had come for understanding to take root, for the first sparks of awareness to become more than whispers. And now, I want you to do something that will mark you as someone who sees what others cannot. In the comments below, type the phrase, "I see the hidden hand," then type it again, twice. Let the words settle, let them resonate. This is not just participation, it is an acknowledgement, a symbolic act that connects you to the knowledge that most dare not even whisper. While you do that, consider the magnitude of what Hibbert uncovered. Each birth, each anomaly, each child with pale skin, golden hair, and piercing blue eyes was not a coincidence. It was the deliberate manifestation of power. The orchestrator's reach was complete into the fields, the quarters, the main houses, the very blood of those enslaved. And yet, for those who saw it, for those who could comprehend the scale, there was also an awakening. Awareness was dangerous, yes, but it was also liberation of a different kind. To see the pattern was to step into a world of forbidden truth, a world most would prefer remain unseen. Across the river parishes, whispers carried, mothers exchanged, glances that held meaning beyond words. Midwives passed along cryptic warnings while children, innocent yet perceptive, learned to observe, to notice, to question. The plantations, once realms of absolute control, were now also theaters of insight. And Hibbert, obsessed, began to map connections that even the orchestrator could not hide. Every birth, every location, every schedule, it all spoke of a system so meticulously designed that human lives themselves had become instruments of assertion and dominance. If you've typed the phrase, you've already taken the first step. You've acknowledged the existence of something vast, deliberate, and hidden. You've aligned yourself with the knowledge that few ever see, and even fewer survive psychologically intact after understanding. And yet this is only the beginning. The pattern stretches further than Louisiana, further than the river parishes, and the orchestrator's motives remain obscured. But for those who now know, the world is no longer as it seems. Shadows are more than darkness. Whispers are more than wind. Life itself is a message, and every impossible birth a signpost on the path toward forbidden understanding. Winter came. Early that year, sweeping across the river parishes with a biting chill that crept into the bones of everyone living under the relentless sun of Louisiana's plantations. The rhythm of labor, once predictable, was now shadowed by unease. Vincent Hibbert, who had become a silent witness to a design he could neither stop nor fully comprehend, pored over his ledger with an intensity bordering on obsession. Each new entry, a 9th child at Cypress Bend, a 10th at Bellytor, added another layer to the horror. Each child bore the same impossible features: pale skin, hair like gold spun from sunlight, and eyes of startling blue that seemed to pierce the darkness of the quarters. The enslaved began to notice subtle inconsistencies, small acts of manipulation that could not be explained away. Mothers realized that their proximity to main houses, their daily movements, even the timing of chores, correlated in ways that made their blood run cold. Conversations became coded, glances sharper, and whispers more deliberate. Where fear had once silenced them, now it sharpened their perception. Something was orchestrating life itself, and though powerless to confront it, they began the first cautious steps toward understanding the invisible machinery controlling their existence. Hibbert recorded every detail meticulously. The 9th and 10th children shared an unsettling pattern. Both mothers had been called into main houses shortly before conception. Both infants born impossibly light-skinned. Both fathers acknowledged only on paper, but visibly unrelated. Hibbert's mind raced. This was no accident, no fluke of genetics. This was deliberate. Every entry was a testament to a power that moved unseen, unchallenged, and absolute. The ledger had become more than a record. It was a map of domination, a mirror reflecting human cruelty and precision, and a window into a force beyond comprehension. Among the enslaved, the births had begun to shift something deeper. Fear now mingled with the first sparks of awareness. They whispered warnings, held children tighter, and noticed the smallest irregularities in the routines dictated by the overseers. Eyes that had learned obedience now watched and interpreted, reading the spaces between words, the silences in the halls, the glances of the overseers. It was subtle, almost imperceptible to those who held power, but it was the beginning of resistance. Knowledge, even forbidden, was awakening a quiet strength. Hibbert too felt the weight of this awakening, could not stop it, could not even act upon it. The orchestrator remained invisible, patient, deliberate, and yet for the first time the ledger seemed to pulse, not just with records, but with the life of something calculating, something alive in its own right, a force that had shaped these 10 children and would continue shaping generations to come. To witness it was to be forever changed, to carry knowledge that most could never bear. And for the enslaved, even in their fear, the first seeds of understanding and subtle defiance had begun to take root. Spring arrived with a deceptive softness. masking the darkness that had grown over the river parishes. Vincent Hebert sat alone in his small study at Bellamont, staring at the ledger as though it were a living entity, each entry a heartbeat in a system he could neither control nor fully understand. 10 children now, each impossibly pale, golden-haired, blue-eyed, each linked by proximity, timing, and the invisible hand guiding their births. The pattern had become a symphony of terror, and Hebert, the unwilling conductor, bound to witness and record every note. He felt the weight of moral conflict pressing down like the humid Louisiana air. On one side was the undeniable truth, the ledger of orchestrated impossibilities that screamed of manipulation and cruelty beyond comprehension.
Out.
But he could not intervene, could not reveal, could not stop. To act would be to challenge forces he could barely imagine, forces that had shaped life itself to assert dominion over the enslaved and their very bloodlines. The orchestrator's motives remained a shadowed enigma, glimpsed only through the impossible children who bore silent witness to a design larger than any single plantation, larger than any individual. Is it pure assertion of dominance? Is it demonstration of absolute authority? A psychological experiment spanning generations, testing obedience, fear, and the limits of human endurance? The ledger offered no answers, only evidence, and evidence carried the weight of forbidden knowledge. Meanwhile, across the river parishes, the enslaved whispered with growing clarity. They spoke in coded phrases, exchanged secret glances, and held their children tighter. Fear had not vanished, it could never vanish, but it had transformed. Awareness mingled with survival, knowledge became a form of resistance, and the first sparks of silent defiance began to flicker. Each impossible birth was a reminder of power wielded without consequence, but also a mirror reflecting the potential for understanding, for seeing the mechanisms of control, for questioning the reality imposed upon them. Hebert's obsession deepened. He reviewed every ledger entry, every observation, every whispered warning he had gathered. He began to recognize the orchestrator not as a single person, but as a system, a network of influence and manipulation. A careful exercise of control over bodies, minds, and the very essence of life. And in that realization, Hebert understood the danger to witness such a system was to bear knowledge that could destroy, yet to ignore it was to surrender one's soul to blindness. He could not unsee, could not unknow, and the weight of this understanding pressed upon him like the inexorable hand of fate itself. The ledger sat open, the candle flickering shadows across its pages. 10 lives, 10 anomalies, 10 proof points of something deliberate, something far beyond the ordinary cruelty of plantations. And as Hebert traced each name with trembling hands, he realized a truth that no one else dared whisper. Understanding this system changes a man, and once changed, there is no return. The path he walked now led only deeper, and the orchestrator's game was far from over. Summer scorched the river parishes, yet the heat did nothing to dull the icy terror that had settled over the plantations. Vincent Hebert, ledger in hand, could feel it in his bones, the invisible presence guiding these impossible births, shaping lives, bending reality itself. 11, 12, 13 children now, each impossibly pale, each with golden hair and piercing blue eyes, each born under circumstances that defied explanation. The pattern was complete, a lattice of control spanning miles, generations, and lives. The enslaved whispered in the shadows with growing clarity. Mothers, once paralyzed by fear, now moved with cautious observation, watching their surroundings, noting every intrusion, every subtle shift in schedules. The midwives exchanged knowing glances, realizing that these births were not anomalies. They were proof of deliberate, systematic manipulation. And yet no one dared speak openly. To name the orchestrator was dangerous, even fatal. The children themselves had become symbols, silent witnesses to a power that could not be challenged. Hebert's obsession had reached a fever pitch. The ledger was no longer merely a record, it was a map of authority, a reflection of the orchestrator's intelligence, precision, and cruelty. He saw connections no one else could, patterns invisible to the casual observer. The timing of conception, proximity to the main houses, the role of midwives. The subtle movement of overseers was as though life itself had been weaponized, sculpted to demonstrate dominion, to enforce obedience, to instill fear at its most intimate level. And yet, within the quarters, something fragile and forbidden stirred. The enslaved had begun small acts of defiance, sharing observations, holding their children close, passing subtle warnings through hushed phrases and hidden signals. Awareness had grown into a quiet resistance, a recognition that the orchestrator, no matter how cunning, could not fully control what was unseen, what was felt, and what was remembered. The ledger chronicled not just horror, but the awakening of perception among those it sought to dominate. Hibbert, trapped between horror and understanding, realized a terrifying truth. The orchestrator's power was absolute. But the knowledge of that power changed everything. To witness it was to feel the weight of creation itself twisted into an instrument of domination. To hold the ledger was to bear the evidence of deliberate manipulation, of life reshaped to serve fear. And as he traced the names of the last children, the 12th, 13th, the final impossibilities, he knew that what he now understood could never be unseen. Once seen, the system could never be ignored. The orchestrator's game would continue, but the witnesses were no longer blind. The ledger remained open, the candlelight flickering over the pages, casting shadows that seemed almost alive. The orchestrator had revealed enough to assert mastery, yet enough remained hidden to terrify completely. The final births marked the culmination of a design so calculated, so precise, that it transcended the cruelty of ordinary power. And as Hibbert leaned back, exhausted, terrified, and obsessed, he understood the ultimate truth. Some knowledge changes a man forever, and there is no returning from the darkness once you have seen the hidden hand at work. The ledger was closed at last, but its weight remained. Vincent Hibbert leaned back, exhausted, trembling. His mind haunted by the impossible births, the patterns he had traced, and the unseen hand that had orchestrated life itself. 13 children, 13 impossibilities, each a testament to a power that moved silently, deliberately, and without consequence. Every pale face, every golden curl, every piercing blue eye, bore witness to a system so precise it seemed almost supernatural. And Hibbert, once a man of order and reason, was now trapped in the gravity of knowledge he could neither escape nor fully comprehend. Across the river parishes, life went on but changed. The enslaved carried the memory of these children, the proof of manipulation, the subtle understanding that, even in chains, awareness could be a weapon. Fear remained, yes, but it had transformed. Knowledge had become a quiet resistance. Every whispered observation, every cautious glance, every mother holding her child close was a signal. The orchestrator may wield power, but insight is never fully contained. The world could be bent, lives controlled, but perception could not be entirely stolen. For you, watching this, the story is more than history, it is a mirror. It asks questions that echo beyond Louisiana, beyond the plantations, beyond the ledger itself. Who holds the power in your life? Who shapes reality in ways unseen, calculated, deliberate? And most importantly, are you aware enough to see it? Once knowledge touches you, once you glimpse the machinery of hidden control, you cannot unsee it. You cannot return to ignorance. The world has shifted, and you are changed. Forever. If you have followed closely, if you have felt the weight of this story, if your awareness has stirred, I want you to do one final thing. Comment below, I see the hidden hand, one last time. Let it anchor the understanding you now carry. Let it signal to the world and to yourself that you recognize patterns, notice manipulation, and are awake to truths most dare not speak aloud. This is not mere engagement. It is alignment with knowledge, with awareness, with the dangerous clarity of seeing what others cannot. Remember, the ledger may be closed, the births may have ended, and the orchestrator may remain unseen, but the shadows linger. The knowledge you now hold is a responsibility, a burden, a gift. It changes how you see the world, how you interpret silence, how you measure power. You cannot forget. You cannot turn away. You can only step forward, eyes open, aware and never the same again. And so, as the candlelight fades, as the river continues its relentless flow, remember this. Power is often hidden, manipulation often invisible, and control can reach further than the law, the eye, or the conscience can follow. But those who see the awakened carry the truth, and once carried, it shapes you. For life, forever.